I was watching a TED talk by Ejin Choi, who is an AI expert, and she said a statement about AI, which I want you to go into each side of it, was that it's unbelievably intelligent, yet shockingly stupid.
Yeah, I mean, that's a beautifully succinct way of putting it. AI has told people to add glue to their pizza sauce to get their cheese to not slide off. But it says it with such confidence that we think that it's very intelligent. We start to realize how much of human interaction is a confidence game almost. Of if you're really confident, then maybe you know what you're talking about. And we see that with AI, and that's some of the very dangerous stuff.
Like I said, it's a difficult topic we're going to get into. There's a huge generative AI wave that's kind of going on, and we're actually going to take a step back in this episode and reflect on some of the implications of this wave. I'm just going to kick this off by asking you something I don't really expect you to give a yes or no answer to, and I don't suppose it has one. But what comes to your mind when you think about artificial intelligence and ethics?
That is a huge discussion. I think a single word would be care, and if you just sum it down to one word, it's care. There is a lot. The larger story behind it is, like all technological advances, there is a lot of potential benefit. There's a lot of potential upside, but like any powerful tool, there can be a good amount of damage, and we've seen some of that damage already happen, and it is a hot topic that is heavily discussed.
Yeah, absolutely, and I will definitely give you the chance to get deeper into both sides of it. You mentioned in a previous conversation we have had that this is not the first time AI has had this hype around it. It's certainly one which is, the more recent one, but like, what do you have to say about AI itself? I mean, these waves have come and go. Do you feel that this wave is also just going to die out like it did in the past, where we're going to, there's going to be this big breakthrough, and then people start to kind of realize some of the implications, some of the consequences of adapting that technology, even the cost at times? Do you think it's something unique this time around, or are we just going to see another slump?
In the past, it really hasn't died down, but the hype around it has died down. It's overpromised, and then everyone thought that it would do these wonderful things, and they possibly it was overpromised. Perhaps it wasn't. People just heard this, didn't understand, got very excited, let their imaginations run wild, and expected more out of it than it could deliver. But those past breakthroughs have continued to march forward and be adopted into everyday life. So I think it'd be nice if we saw that with generative AI, where everyone's really excited, and then everyone kind of realizes, okay, maybe this isn't the end all be all. This isn't, what everyone talks about of a general purpose AI that can go out and do scientific breakthroughs and do everything else all by itself. Where we just say, hey, go invent the cure for cancer, and then 2 weeks later it spits something out. And then we say, okay, how do we build it? And it spits something out again. And then we, build the machine that it tells us to, and off we go. I don't think that general AI is going to be that. I think if we ever do reach something like that, it will be a component of it. And the research that's being done now, and then the technology that's being developed to bring that science and that research from generative AI into everyday our world and our everyday life will help generate something like that. But at the same time, I don't want to downplay the impacts of this. I mean, generative AI could very well be just as big of a breakthrough as getting to the moon. Mm-hmm. If you think about it, just the training sets that were needed to train, some of these generative AIs and these big models that we've seen. If you stop and think about that, and the annotation, the work that's been done to it, that is incredibly impressive. So, I mean, I don't want to take away from all the hard work that people have done, but I don't want to, diminish that in any way, because it's wonderful. There's been a lot of work. There's been a lot of tedious work. But we will see where it goes. I do think this one's going to have a bit more staying power because it's not just returning numbers; it's returning something that you can't see. Well, it's returning something not that you can't see, but something that you can read through, and it looks a lot like something that a person would write. Oh, the other thing that's really struck me about this is I think I downloaded Olama version 2 or 3, and it's eight gigs on your computer, and then you run it on your laptop, and it spits things out. And you start asking it pretty broad questions, and factually, there's issues there, but on some of it, it's right. And if you think about it as a compression algorithm, what they've done is they've taken, and you think about it, say they've taken the entire internet and they've compressed it down into something that's about 8 gigs of space that then gives you a pretty good approximation of what was actually on the internet and what you would find without having to be connected to the internet. In that regard, if you think about it just from that aspect, it's a very impressive lossy compression technology.
Yeah, for sure. And I kind of want to take this chance to dive into both sides of AI. I was watching a TED talk by Ejin Choi, who is an AI expert, and she said a statement about AI, which I want you to kind of go into each side of it. Was that it's unbelievably intelligent yet shockingly stupid.
I'm not. That's a
Let's stick to the
beautifully
shockingly stupid part, maybe
yeah.
for
I
now.
mean, that's a beautifully succinct way of putting it. Yeah, we've definitely seen cases where AI has told people to add glue to their pizza sauce to get their cheese to not slide off. I mean, but it says it with such confidence that we think that it's very intelligent. So much of this stuff is really kind of it. We start to realize how much of human interaction is a confidence game almost. Of if you're really confident, then maybe you know what you're talking about. And we see that with AI, and that's some of the very dangerous stuff. You know, anyone who's worked with it to generate source code or anything like that, I don't know how much code I've had it generate, and quite often it will not run in the format that you get. You can like a statement to run on a Postgres database, and there's just syntactic errors. And you go and you change a few little things, change a word here, change this or that, very small changes, and then it'll run, but it doesn't run right off the bat. And I mean, when I was in college and TAing, generally your code had to run. 50% of your grade was based on can I run your code in a computer without an error, or if it will it compile. With interpreted languages, it's can it run? And so if you look at that, generally, generative AI fails that first test. I guess the first test would be, did you put your name on it? But
yeah, for sure. And there is like this question that comes to my mind is that the missing factor is kind of common sense, what we call common sense. You don't put glue on a pizza. But do you think that's something AI has the capacity to develop?
well, there's a saying, common sense isn't that common. And I don't know how many times I've seen people do things and I kind of wonder, well, what were you thinking was going to happen? So that might be a very high bar to ask AI to achieve when I'm not sure, when you see people that do stuff all the time. And sometimes it's low risk. I'm not really thinking, sure, that's fine. I mean, how many times have you cracked an egg and thrown it into the stove, put it onto the stove, forgetting to put the pan down, and you just put an egg all over the stove? I mean, that those kind of little things are like, oh, I've done this 100 times, and this one time I didn't have the pan on the stove. I'm talking about that kind of stuff. So, I mean, is that common sense or is that just not paying attention? Like I said, I'm not sure AI will ever get to what I'm sure AI will never achieve what everyone will say is common sense. We can't ask everyone in the world, does this AI have common sense? Someone's going to disagree. That's
Yeah, for sure.
That's just far too subjective. I think it'll convince a lot of people that it does have common sense. There will be a point when that happens.
Yeah.
But once again, I think GP, I don't want to say GPT because that's a very specific model, but I do want to say some of these models do look like they have common sense, and then really start to fall apart when you ask them for facts, and you get these hallucinations that come in, like what were the top 10 grossing movies in the United States in 2016? I think they fixed that one since that came out. But it was easily verifiable things like that suddenly aren't there.
Yeah.
And I'm, but that's not common facts. That's trivia. And I think IBM's Watson already won Jeopardy, so we've established that they're good at matching things to trivia facts.
Yeah, and that makes me wonder that AI can only be as good as the data behind it as well. More data will not necessarily mean better data as well. So that's another concern. And I'm wondering whether, with data privacy laws also getting kind of stronger, more regulation, especially with AI, I'm wondering if AI will kind of hit a saturation point in terms of how good it can get. How far do you think we are from that point?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of discussion, and I forgot what they call it. It's really kind of the data desert, or the just running out of data to consume to power training these new models. And the other problem, there's that issue. I think we're getting close to that. The other issue that I think is going to be a bigger problem is identifying what is made from generative AI. And we've already seen that AI start to, for lack of a better term, go off the rails. I'm sure there are people that can speak to this a lot better than I can, that are in academia and have studied it. But my general understanding is AI, if you train AI on other AI generated data, it goes off the rails. And so at this point, we've almost got a poisoned data set now on the internet, where I'm not sure they could build a data set like they did for GPT at this point, because there is so much generative AI, content generated by generative AI that's out there. So I'm not sure if they could filter that out. I remember hearing, this information is kind of like these forever chemicals. And I remember hearing about a study where they were trying to look at what human blood looked like but Teflon was in it. And they ended up having to go back to blood samples taken by the military from like before the Korean War, when Teflon was developed, because now all of us have Teflon in our blood. I think generative AI is creating data that's very similar to that, which is going to make generating these huge training sets very difficult. But I mean, I think that's a bigger concern at this point than when have we managed to package up all of the data that humans have generated and use that in a training set.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that kind of just opens another box. I mean, few years down the line, we might have too much data for AI to even kind of hold.
We've just made reproducing the work that's already been done much harder.
Yeah, absolutely. And brings me to another thought, is that with this kind of regulation with data, but also now we have this other problem you've identified of AI not being able to identify its own creation almost. It does also put into or kind of allows only some organizations, some very large organizations, then to be able to afford something like this. And if I'm kind of to just back up, but the answer to this might be an extreme level AI model, which is massive. And there are huge downfalls to that, as far as I can see, because it puts a large set of data into the hands of very few players. How does that make you feel?
So overall, what we're seeing is the reduction in access to being able to do this kind of research, which will happen with any technology breakthrough. You start out, all the low hanging fruit can be picked, and then as you start getting higher and higher and more complex, it starts requiring a larger and larger effort to get there. So in that regard, this is following kind of the pattern that we've seen in a lot of things. You look at I'm just now reading a book on Rudolf Diesel, and they talk about all the diesel engine manufacturers that started out and how a lot of them were very happy to make a 30 horsepower engine or very small engines with everything else. But you look at that number and that's decreased. Fewer and fewer companies are making diesel engines now, and I think we're going to see the exact same thing with generative AI. There's some great work that's being done to try and put these data sets out there in the public so everyone can use it. But once you have the training set, there's only so much you can do. And I think there's a lot. I mean, there's still things that can be done in terms of optimizing training and things and those algorithms. And that work has been going on since well before the 90s. But it is concerning that we are going to see that. The thing that I'm very concerned about, and is a very big topic right now, is the amount of energy that's needed to run a generative AI model. I think I saw in a news article that Google was looking at contracting with nuclear reactors. I remember when Google was all about, everything is green energy now, and now they're just saying, hey, we need nuclear reactors, we need more power. And that is much more concerning to me than the loss of access to these massive data sets. Because as they get bigger, they're just going to be harder and harder for anyone to work with. Not everyone can find a computer that has, half a terabyte of RAM and 18 GPUs to run it, much less power the stupid thing. The work that Musk has been doing to build their big machine learning data center with all of those H100 NVIDIA processors. I haven't looked at what the power consumption is on that thing, but it has got to be massive. And that concerns me, just from what this is doing to the environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so glad you brought up that point, because I think largely that's something we kind of shoved to the back of our minds. We had a similar kind of happening with blockchain when it came out, and then it started. I mean, Elon Musk went out and made a statement, but truly the impact for it has been it's quite bizarre how much energy these are consuming, and then you start to actually wonder if AI is even becoming accessible, or is there a certain kind of AI that's becoming accessible to people who probably can't pay millions for it.
Yeah. So, the nice part is the people that can pay millions for it are renting out access to their systems for the most part. You look at, and some of them, they're only letting them be rented out. Google has their TPU processor, which they have developed in-house, and you can go buy some TPU processors, such as the Coral processor that plugs into your Raspberry Pi, nice little dongle, but it's nowhere near as powerful as Google's big TPU systems, and they're not selling those. Last I heard, you could not purchase those from Google. You can only rent them. So we are going to see a concentration of this kind of stuff happen. And, between NVIDIA and Google's hardware, I know Apple's building AI cores into their chips and everything else, but those are very much for running it. This isn't for training it. The TPU is designed for training it. The NVIDIA chips are designed for training it. And those, I think I saw some of those H100 cards now from NVIDIA are going for like 80 grand, 20 to 80 grand a pop. I'm sure it depends on a number of hardware features, but that is not something that a consumer or a small company is really going to put in their put in their systems. That being said, most companies don't need their own data center. They don't even need their own server racks anymore because we've gone to the cloud. So we are seeing a concentration, but at the same time, that concentration is being leased out to companies that can't afford to build them. I mean, even if they wanted to stand up a single server rack, a lot of startup companies couldn't afford to do that. So it's good and bad. I'll be really interested to see what happens with TPU core development in the next 5 years.
So, what do you have to say about the transparency of the data that's being used by AI or that AI is trained on?
That is one of the big problems with it. With any of these models, you put in a number of things, and then tracing back what fact or set of facts led to an output is almost impossible. I have a weird feeling in the back of my mind that there might be a mathematical solution to that. You look at if you look at anything like back propagation and things like that happens when you're training, you start to understand how they are tracing this back, and they're following a gradient to optimize on their models. But that happens during training. So to understand, what makes this so important and what aspects, what training data led to this, that is a much bigger question mathematically. I feel like there should be a way to do it, but I also can't prove that there's a way to do that. So, you don't want to sit down and say, yeah, you can do this. That would be a very interesting breakthrough if someone came up with a way to say, you ask any of these models, please write a cover letter for me. And then if it would generate the output and then give you the specific excerpts, that played the high. I mean, ultimately, all of the training data is going to have some impact. But if you could say, what's the 10% most impactful aspect of the training data, if it could provide that to the output, that would be a very interesting breakthrough to happen. We're doing something similar to that right now with grounding. I don't know if you with retrieval augmented generation, RAG, setting up a RAG model using using any of the generative AI models. But even RAG can only get you so far. That doesn't help you with the training set. And the area where the training set would be really vital could be for things like author attribution. Because if you're including a number of copywritten works, and then if that copywritten work helps with the output, then should you, and this gets into ethics and business, then should that author who originally wrote that work receive some kind of royalty? Right now, we can't do that, but I could see where there could be some kind of a royalty schedule built off of that. If we could say this part of the training data, this subsection of the training data was primarily used to generate this response. That would be a very interesting outcome to see.
Yeah, that is certainly an interesting road to go down as well. I'm wondering how you find that balance between being transparent, but at the same time there also needs to be security of data. So how do you kind of balance that out?
The easiest way to do that is you don't include any training data that could be exposed to the person asking the model questions. And at this point, I firmly believe that the best way to have security of data is to only train models that are used by a company on that company's data. That company can't have other companies' data, so you've got to segregate the data out. and keep that very well partitioned. Because ultimately right now we can't prove that you won't have data leakage back and forth between some of those things. There's a number of things you can do with anonymizing and changing the data, but then you're using modified data for training. And what's that going to do to your overall outcome? I think you would really have to ask a researcher who's, spent quite a while researching this stuff, that question. But that would be something that I'd be very concerned about. So I think at this point, the safest approach is to take the naive approach and just, if this person can't know about this data, they can't use a model that's trained with that data at all.
Yeah. I think it has been an interesting discussion so far. I want to talk more about how AI has personally affected you and your work at Booster as well. So if you could talk a bit about just how it's affected your role.
So since AI is non-deterministic for the most part, you can play with temperature settings and things like that on all of these models to make it look very deterministic. It has made my role quite a bit more difficult, because one of the questions that we deal with is, well, how often is it accurate? What is accuracy? Does it give you the right answer 100% of the time? How do you know what the right answer is? Things like that. So in that regard, it's made my role quite a bit more difficult, because we want to use AI. Everyone wants to use AI and generative AI. But then they say, well, how do we know that it's only giving the correct answer? And the answer is, you don't. You've got to put a human in the loop. Then the response is, well, what's the point? So in that regard, it's a new technology. You've got to pay attention to it. You've got to research it. You've got to understand things. But I also have to be able to give accurate and honest evaluations and answers to business and the stakeholders of when they say, hey, I want to use AI. Well, wonderful. What do you want to use it for? Oh, this, and this. Well, these are some of the problems. On the personal side of things, it's gotten to be very interesting, since my wife is a social worker, and we did put together a talk on how to use AI in the social work profession. And there was a lot of concern there, because they've got HIPAA compliance and things like that. And their business side is saying, we want you to use AI to write case notes. So you're going through a session, and this is mental health with people, and this is very sensitive information. And then they want an AI is paying attention and helping you write up case notes for this. Well, is that a good idea? And one of the big questions is, so we're typing this information in and all these bullet points, so then AI will write out a full case note instead of just having our rough notes. What happens to that data? And unfortunately for a lot of these therapists, and they're personally responsible, their licenses are on the line on this, even though their company is wanting them to use this. The answer is, you really don't know, unless your company needs to have in-place contracts with the provider of this generative AI tool that says they will properly safeguard your data. And are they HIPAA compliant? And very few of them knew the answer to that. They knew that HIPAA compliance is something they had to have. So that is also very concerning, just from a non-technical professional standpoint of, all of a sudden my employer wants me to use AI. You could be a doctor in a hospital. They want you to use AI to get through your charting, case notes, whatever, faster on each patient visit. Well, if you're typing things in, then whose fault is that if there is a data breach? Is that the AI provider's fault? Is it the hospital administrator's fault? Is it the individual doctor's fault? So all of that gets into a legal mess and a legal quagmire that is scary. And the only thing we could really do in that conversation was help them with, these are the questions you should be asking. do we have a contract in place with this provider? Are they HIPAA compliant? Those kind of things. So from a personal standpoint, that's very scary, just to see all of the excitement around it and people trying to use it everywhere. And I'm not sure it has a place in certain areas. I mean, if a mental health provider writes in notes that then run through an AI, and then the AI says this person is in danger of harming themselves or others, so that now this person needs to get picked up and put on a psychiatric hold for some period of time. Does the mental health, does a therapist agree with that or not? Can the AI just push that through? Then all of a sudden, can an AI deprive an American citizen of their rights based on something else? That these are very scary ethical issues. I think they're being handled pretty well. Ultimately, the mental health provider says, no, the AI is wrong. It doesn't know what it's talking about. It's an AI. We're not putting this person on a mental health hold. But those are concerns.
For sure. I think we're coming close to the end now. So I don't want to, this conversation could go on forever, but for anyone working with AI, what are some practical steps you would kind of suggest to them to ensure that they're at least trying to be ethical, or what options are there out there?
So this one requires a decent amount of imagination, but you kind of have to stop and say, what damage could this cause? Right? And then you have to say, okay, what's the worst that could happen here? And then you have to say, is that plausible that could happen? Like, there is a case where a parent is now suing an AI provider because their teenage son was using this virtual friend, and the parents are saying that the AI told the son to kill himself, and the son did kill himself. It's very sad. So you've got to think about that. And they spent a lot of time building in safeguards and everything else, but you've got to ask yourself, what's the worst that can happen with this? Is this AI writing emails to potential customers? Okay, what's the worst that can happen there? Well, it might write up something and says and address it to their competitor or something like that. It might make one of those kind of gaps. So in that case, you have to strongly advise your users to proofread everything. In a really crazy situation, let's say that we decide to go all in on the AI thing and say, we're going to have AI automatically dose patients in a hospital with drugs. Horrible idea, I think we can all agree on. Then the case is, well, all of a sudden it's just intravenously pumping a person full of whatever drug it decides, and we don't know what drug that's going to be. That's a relatively easy one. That's a relatively easy situation to imagine happening as you're building a system that would automatically, without any human oversight, administer drugs to a person. But when you start getting into some of these other things of, well, it's writing an email. What's the worst that can happen? It's transcribing voicemail notes. What's the worst that can happen? I think then you really have to look at, how is the information that the AI is generating used? Mm-hmm. Are people using that to make decisions that can impact life or limb? Are people using that to generate decisions? What should I cook for dinner tonight? Well, you broke your diet plan because the AI said you should go have potatoes au gratin. Not really the end of the world. So I think with all tools, we just have to look at what could go wrong.
My final question to this would be, how do you counter the argument that fine, AI might put us in positions where life might be at risk? If we take the case of self-driving cars, for example. That's a popular one. Humans are more likely to get into car crashes, which are fatal, more often than a self-driving car would perhaps. So that would ultimately result in a lesser impact on human life. How do you kind of what I'm trying to say is the problem only that we just don't know who to blame when it's AI?
I think there's some of that. I would ultimately say what you have to look at here, and I'm going to completely steal this from my wife, is you have to look at a reduced harm model. And that is, what's the, we understand that harm is going to happen. We understand bad things are going to happen. So then you have to look at it and say, which outcome is going to have the least amount of harm? A good example there is, say someone's hooked on heroin and cigarettes. Both are bad for you. Both are dangerous. You generally tell them to stop using heroin and say, yeah, keep smoking cigarettes. Because guess what? That's a reduced harm model. No one's going to just knock it all. Well, some people do, but no one's going to knock it all off at once. So I think that that's what we need to really look at here is, what is the current situation? And understand that AI is going to cause problems. AI is going to make mistakes. We are going to have accidents, and there's going to be bad things that happen to it. And then ask ourselves, is that better than how things are now? So I think that's probably a good way to look at it, and just keep that in mind.
Didi, it was a pleasure speaking to you. I've had a lot to learn today, and I'm definitely not going to be able to sleep tonight. But yeah, it was a pleasure talking to you, and I hope you all enjoyed the episode as well.
Great to talk with you as well.